It's Billy Harris. Now, if you'd told me back in '44 that I'd end up designing inflatable tanks and running a phantom army, well, I would have laughed. Nervously, mind you. See, I was a planner, not some battlefield hero. Yet there I was, knee-deep in rubber decoys and soundtracks trying to fool the Nazis without ever firing a shot. I grew up just doodling machines in a notebook. Wasn't about war back then. I just loved how a few simple lines could hold power and purpose. So when the Army called me to Washington, they weren't looking for generals. They were looking for imagination. They needed people who could stage illusions so convincing German generals would reroute entire divisions chasing shadows. That's how I ended up in the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. You might know us by our better name, the Ghost Army. We were a strange crew. Artists, fresh out of New York studios, engineers with more patents than combat stripes, sound wizards who treated tank engines like symphonies. Our motto? Simple. Appear real, then vanish. One day, I was buried in maps, in a dusty room. The next, I was standing in a soggy field outside London, watching inflatable Sherman tanks rise from the fog like ghosts. We worked fast, and we fooled the sharpest cameras the Luftwaffe had. It was part art, part spy game, and completely wild. I remember our first real test. I stood by a quiet country road, recon planes buzzing overhead. We scrambled to fluff the turrets, lay fake tracks like actors setting the stage. And right then, it hit me. War isn't just firepower. It's belief. It's perception. If you can make the enemy see you where you're not, you can save lives where you really are. And let me tell you, there's no feeling quite like knowing that your strongest weapon was creativity. Welcome to our world, where rubber and radio waves became the tools of war. I got the call in a stuffy DC office. 1 minute, I was routing convoys. The next, I had orders to report for a top-secret assignment. No details. Not over the phone, just a note. Bring your notebook, your pencil, and your best ideas. I showed up at this converted warehouse. The place was lined with blueprints, sketches of rubber tanks, and photos of sound rigs. Officers in plain uniforms paced the floor. They looked more curious than combat-ready, if you ask me. Then came the mission: build a fake army, inflate tanks instead of rolling out steel, blast battlefield noise instead of marching boots, send phantom radio chatter instead of real commands. Welcome to the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, better known as the Ghost Army. My first assignment? Assemble the team. Artists fresh from New York studios, engineers who knew pumps, wiring, and pressure gauges, sound experts who could mimic the rumble of a convoy with a needle and tape, even playwrights. Yeah, playwrights brought in to teach us how to act like a division on the move. We started training at Fort Belvoir, just outside D.C. That first week felt more like art school than basic training. Painters practicing camouflage, airbrushing color onto massive rubber bladders. Sculptors studying every curve of a Sherman tank, replicating it down to the hatch. Meanwhile, the engineers and I, we worked compressors, timed our inflations. 8 minutes for a medium tank, 12 for a heavy. Then deflate, fold, load, move. Speed was everything. Fool 'em fast, or risk being found. Then came radio school. You know, Morse codettes got rhythm like a fingerprint. We practiced until we could fake the call signs of entire divisions. Our radio nets buzzed with ghost voice signals the enemy would hear and fear. Field exercises? Now those were something else. We piled decoys, speakers, radios onto trucks and rolled out to open fields. Under a crescent moon, we inflated tanks like balloons. From above, it looked like war. Down on the ground, it felt absurd. Then came our first test. A recon plane, low and circling. We hit the switch. Engines roared. Tracks clanked. Voices echoed through the mist. Searchlights lit up the night. The plane banked, dropped flares, right over our decoys. We roared, cheering like kids who pulled off a magic trick. But this was more than trickery. It was protection. It was war, turned sideways. I kept everything in a sketchbook. Diagrams, timelines, frequencies, mistakes, surprises, lessons inked on every page. That sketchbook? It became our Bible for Europe. And on the final day before deployment, the brass showed up. We staged a full division. Tanks lined up in firing formation. Convoys in motion. Radios chattering with orders that didn't exist. Then, poof. We vanished, folded it all down, packed the illusion onto trailers. They nodded, quietly impressed. I stood there, chest high, heart full. Because we weren't just artists or engineers or scribblers with big dreams anymore. We were the Ghost Army, misfits turned masters of deception. And we were headed across the ocean, ready to change the course of a war, with nothing but teamwork, timing, and imagination. I'll never forget the day we turned a pile of rubber into a fleet of tanks. It all began on a weathered farm at the edge of Fort Belvoir. Scattered across the ground, a dozen flat rubber bladders, lifeless like expired pool toys, forgotten in the sun. But by sunrise, they had to look and feel like real Sherman tanks. First came the skins. Sculptors studied every photo they could find, then shaped giant molds to match every curve and hatch. They poured rubber, pressed it, pulled it, until the sheets came alive. We rolled them out, snapped them together, and watched the body of a tank rise up from the earth. Still, it sagged. It was hollow. That's when the engineers stepped in. They hooked up hoses, fired up the pumps, and in minutes, those limp sheets stood proud as war machines. We timed it, 8 minutes to full size, 9 if the morning air ran cold. Every second mattered. If the order came to vanish, we had to disappear before the enemy ever knew we were there. Then came the paint. Artists with airbrush guns worked like poets, layering olive drab, streaks of sand, blotches of mud, not random, real. They mimicked the chaos of combat wear. They stitched canvas skirts from old uniforms, draped them over wheels to hide the hoses, and gave each tank that worn, lived-in look. Next, sculptors added rubber vents. Painters dabbed rust and dust in all the right places. Seen through binoculars, they were indistinguishable from the real thing. But still, a tank without sound is just a statue. So, we captured the voice of war. Soundmen climbed into a real Sherman, planting microphones where steel kissed steel. For weeks, they recorded every groan, every rattle, every clank of iron. Then, back at the farm, we mounted horn speakers to half-tracks, tuned the amps, and let the thunder roll. The sound of tanks in motion. Deep, distant, and heavy, echoed for miles. And then, we added fire. Blanks fired. Machine guns clicked. It wasn't just noise. It was convincing. But a symphony needs a signal, so we turned to radio. We trained to copy real battalion chatter. Not just the words, but the rhythm. Every pause, every stutter. Even Morse code had personality. We sent fake messages all day. Engine failures, supply requests, dawn movements. Sometimes, we even whispered of enemy balloons, just believable enough to raise a few eyebrows. Then we staged the scene. Volunteers in uniform unloaded crates, pitched tents, drove trucks past idling tanks. They raised division flags, lit campfires, made soup. One night, a recon plane flew so low, we swore the pilot tipped his wing in salute before banking away. Because it looked real. It sounded real. It felt real. We even planted empty shell casings, dragged fake tank tracks, and strung camouflage netting like spider silk. We didn't just build decoys. We built a story so convincing the enemy would report it as truth. Once, during a major drill, a real armored column passed nearby. We waited, watched them disappear around the bend. Then, we lit the soundstage. Tanks, voices, thunder, all of it, rolling like a storm across the fields. Then, silence. We shut it down, folded the tanks, and vanished into the shadows. By the time training ended, I had inflated dozens of tanks, run hundreds of sound tests, and logged more hours of radio chatter than I care to count. My sketchbook was full. Diagrams of hose layouts, speaker placements, radio frequencies. That book became our Bible when we landed in Europe. What I learned wasn't just about deception. It wasn't about who had the biggest gun. It was about imagination. It was about fooling the eye, tricking the ear, and outsmarting the mind. Simple tricks, maybe, but they were good ones, and they made the Ghost Army real in every way that mattered. 2 weeks after D-Day, we got our first real mission in France. The Allies had just built those temporary mulberry harbors off Normandy, giant floating ports to unload troops and supplies. But the Germans? They were still watching the coast, waiting to strike. Our job? Draw their fire away from the real harbors. So we picked a stretch of beach near Arromanches, set up fake harbor gear, inflatable landing craft, bobbing in the surf, wooden piers and mock cranes rising from the sand. We even ran hoses from portable pumps, made it look like water lines were feeding into the dunes. Our artists? They didn't miss a detail. They sprayed on rust, painted peeling streaks, sun-faded markings. Everything to make the illusion feel lived in, real. Then came the sound. At night we lit up the speakers, the rumble of trucks rolling down ramps, the hiss of hydraulic cables, the clang of metal girders. Radio chatter buzzed with requests for gasoline and repair crews. We made that beach hum like a lifeline. At dawn, a German patrol boat crept close. They spotted us, reported heavy traffic on the beach. Then they opened fire. Shells slammed into the sand. Smoke filled the air. Our inflatables flipped and folded like popped balloons. We held our breath, hoping the real harbor crews could hold their ground. They did. The deception worked. German commanders diverted artillery, even a panzer battalion, to shell an empty beach. They set up observation posts, aimed their big guns at nothing but sand and shadows. That bought us hours. Hours to unload fuel, troops, food, everything the Allies needed to press forward. Next, we moved inland, near the old Maginot Line. We set up fake tank parks, blasted sound through mountain valleys. Panzer units raced to intercept our advance. Meanwhile, real Allied columns slipped past, right behind them, striking weaker lines. Later, in the dark woods of Hurtgen, we staged a phantom buildup on one ridge, while real infantry pushed from the other. German forces swung back and forth, unsure where the threat was coming from. But our biggest success? Pas de Calais. We faked an entire second invasion. Radio traffic, reconnaissance sightings, whole phantom divisions spread across empty fields. German troops stayed locked in at Calais for weeks. Long after D-Day had passed, that meant fewer defenders in Normandy, faster progress inland, fewer lives lost. By month's end, we hadn't fired a shot, but we'd saved countless. It was a strange kind of victory. No bullets, no bombs, just inflatable tanks, loudspeakers, and radio lies. But it proved something we'd always believed. Perception can shape reality, And sometimes, reality is how you win a war. I still get chills thinking about my first real sonic deception in France. We were deep in hedgerow country. Narrow roads, mud-slick tracks, and thick trees pressing in from both sides. The Germans believed a Panzer division was advancing through that corridor. Our job? Make it sound true. We parked half-track speakers just over a rise, hidden from view. It took hours to fine-tune the sound. Too loud, and we'd give ourselves away. Too soft, and we'd fail the mission. By dusk, we had it dialed in. Engines idling, gears grinding, men barking orders, all looped on a wind-up tape recorder. Then night fell. We hit the switch. Suddenly, the hedgerows came alive, growling with the weight of machines pushing through brush. Leaves trembled. The air thickened. Even the crickets went silent. I felt it in my chest, like thunder, but artificial thunder, crafted by our hands. Next morning, a German recon patrol scouted the area. They radioed back. Tank column cleared the woods. Reports rolled in, tracks in the mud, fresh tire marks, all of it fake. But it looked real enough to fool them. Command redirected an entire regiment to intercept our phantom force. That was one of my proudest moments. We'd sent them chasing shadows in the dark. But we didn't stop there. Radio deceptions added a whole new layer. Our operators could mimic the exact rhythm of a real unit's signal traffic. Every tap on the key, timed to perfection. We sent fake supply calls, ammo requests. Even dropped whispers that local villagers were helping our advance. And the Germans? They believed it. One night, I joined the radio crew, watched them swap scripts, rehearse codes. Voices hushed, hands steady. It felt like performance art, with deadly stakes. Then it happened. A German operator replied by mistake. For a second, both sides were on the line. The bunker erupted in cheers. It worked. Sound and radio. They were two sides of the same coin. When we heard real tanks in the distance, we responded with bursts of engine noise. Sometimes, the blend was so seamless even we couldn't tell what was real. The hedgerows were tricky, trees twisted sound, echoes doubled back. We moved speakers inch by inch, changed angles, added layers, background chatter, birdsong beneath the engines so no one would catch on to the unnatural silence. One afternoon, a German ambulance rolled down the track, right toward our decoys. I watched through binoculars. It slowed, then reversed. They radioed for directions, unsure whose territory they were in. We knew we had 'em. Later, medics actually showed up to treat fake wounded in empty fields. That's when I started adding my own touches. Fake distress calls, wounded voices, breathless and groaning. Recorded them outside, matched to the night air. It made the illusion human. It made it hurt. I tracked every detail. Speaker positions, volume levels, radio codes. Filled page after page in my sketchbook. That book became my night lamp. I'd lie awake sketching new effects, new tricks. Those hedgerow operations changed me. We saved lives, not with rifles or shells, but with sound, signal, and imagination. Every time a German shell landed harmlessly on empty ground, I thought of our speaker boxes humming behind the hedges, of Morse code tapping through the trees. Looking back, those were my finest hours in the Ghost Army. I wasn't pulling triggers, I was pulling strings. Strings of illusion, of echoes. And when the records were finally declassified, and I heard survivors say it felt like they were being hunted by ghosts, I smiled. Because that's exactly what we were. In war, the sharpest weapon isn't always a gun. Sometimes it's a whisper behind the trees. A sound that shouldn't be there. A rumor you can't ignore. Perception shapes reality, and sometimes perception is all it takes to win. We weren't just inflating tanks and blasting speakers. We had to sell the whole show. That meant staging convoys, setting up roadblocks, wearing the right uniforms. It was like putting on a play right in the middle of a battlefield. One morning, I rolled up to a dusty crossroads, just outside a small French village. Our trucks were lined up, like they'd driven straight from a supply depot. Soldiers leaned on their vehicles, rifles slung low, uniforms faded just enough to feel lived in. Across one lane, we built a makeshift roadblock, wooden logs, sandbags, the works. And just for flair, we hung a weathered sign that read, Division HQ. A couple of artists, dressed as staff officers, strolled around with clipboards, barking orders to invisible men, scribbling notes like generals on tour. Behind them, sound trucks were prepped and purring, ready to roll out engine growls and marching rhythms. Radio men tapped out fake dispatches about incoming supply columns. Everything looked official. I walked past the roadblock, nodded at the faux MPs, gave a thumbs up to a half-track crew, hauling ammo. They laughed, waved back. It felt like a strange parade. Equal parts military op and theater troupe. Locals peeked out from behind lace curtains, curious but too polite to stare. And then, a jeep appeared on the road. Real markings, real insignia. We froze. Was this the moment it all came apart? The jeep slowed. The driver scanned our setup. Then, he gave a quick salute and turned down a side lane. He must have thought we were the real deal. Later that day, we fired up the soundscape. Engines roared. Trucks rolled. Even distant artillery thumped in the background. In a nearby field, a group of farmers dropped their tools and ran for cover. Mission accomplished. They believed. And just to keep it light, someone had painted a smiley face on one of the inflatables. It looked ridiculous, but it reminded us this was still a trick, a grand illusion. We'd wave at each other behind camouflage nets, sharing a private joke. That mix of detail and humor, it was everything. If we stayed in character, kept our heads, and played the part, we could fool anyone. That quiet little crossroads, it became a stage for our phantom forces. And even now, when I think back on that day, I still chuckle, picturing some poor German general, scratching his head, wondering why his men never found us. I'll never forget the night we came too close for comfort. We'd set up decoy tanks along a narrow road just inside enemy territory. The moon was low. Shadows stretched long across the fields. Everything felt still, too still. Our sound trucks were parked a half-mile out, engines off, dead silent. Radio operators huddled around a dim lamp, fingers ready over fake code sheets. I crept forward to check our inflatables. One of the tanks had a rip in the canvas skirt, the part that hid the hoses. I froze. If a patrol saw that tear, just that one slip, the whole act would come crashing down. Then, a rustle in the hedges. I pressed myself against the tank, my heart pounding like a drum. A German jeep rolled down the road, headlights off. I swallowed hard. The driver coasted right past, right beside the damaged tank. I could hear boots crunching gravel. I risked a peek. The jeep slowed, paused, then picked up speed again. They must have thought it was mud, or a shadow. Relief hit me so hard I almost laughed, but I stayed still, silent, only moved after their taillights vanished down the bend. Then I sprinted back to HQ, called in a repair crew. A week later, we had another close call, this time during a rainstorm. Water seeped into our sound gear, shorted out one of the speakers. At first light, We were supposed to launch the full sonic deception. Instead, we got static, sputtering. I watched through binoculars as a recon plane circled overhead, its camera flash popping through the mist. Panic. I ran for the sound truck, hands shaking, yanking wires, flipping switches. Finally, a cough, a crackle. Then, the roar of engines and shouting men blasted into the air. I exhaled so hard my lungs burned. The plane banked away. We got lucky. Again. One of the scariest moments came during a staged supply drop. We'd set out crates marked for the 3rd Armored Division, faked a fresh delivery of ammo. Then we saw it, a Luftwaffe bomber. Low, slow, silhouettes of bombs under its wings. We hit the alarms, blared cannon fire through the speakers, dove behind sandbags. The plane hovered, turned, then climbed. No bombs dropped. Maybe he thought we were already under fire. Maybe the sound convinced him. Either way, he disappeared into the clouds. I felt equal parts proud and terrified. That mix of fear and relief, it became normal, our new rhythm. Every mission felt like walking a tightrope over a pit full of enemies with binoculars and bullets. One misstep, one torn canvas, one dead speaker, and it could all fall apart. But our team, we stayed sharp. We patched tiers in minutes, rewired gear in the dark, swapped code sheets on the fly. We trusted each other, trusted quick hands, calm heads. Looking back, those close calls taught me more than our flawless illusions ever could. They taught me how fragile a deception is, and how strong the conviction must be to keep it alive. In those tight, breathless moments, I realized what the Ghost Army really was. A band of misfits bound by one mission to face danger so others didn't have to. And when it all came together, when the enemy chased shadows and our real troops advanced, that relief was worth every heartbeat that nearly stopped. I never thought of war as a canvas until I joined the Ghost Army. Our artists traded brushes for pumps. They swapped easels for air compressors, and yet their work saved lives. Painters who once chased gallery openings now painted giant rubber tanks at dawn. They mixed olive drab and sand like masters working in oils. The patterns they sprayed fooled the sharpest aerial cameras. They turned flat sheets into convincing war machines. Sculptors shaped vents and hatches from rubber putty. They studied every bolt, every weld of a Sherman tank. Their replicas looked so real, even engineers doing final checks paused in awe. Sound experts? They became field composers. They recorded engine groans, track clanks, like musical themes. Back at camp, they edited and mixed tapes, building the roar of a phantom division so vivid, German scouts believed every note. Radio operators wrote scripts like playwrights, fake orders, supply calls, distress signals, even whispers of civilian spies. Their messages carried the voice of real units and kept German intelligence chasing ghosts. Watching these artists work side by side with engineers taught me something. Creativity wasn't just a perk, it was a weapon. A clever idea could do what guns could not. I remember watching a painter airbrush muddy streaks onto a tank's side. He stepped back, wiped sweat from his brow, and smiled. "It's our best wrecked tank yet," he said. I laughed, but he meant it. He knew those streaks might draw enemy fire away from real crews. In another corner, a sound tech hummed while adjusting his speakers. He said the tune helped him imagine real engines. Then he cranked up the volume, and we all felt the ground tremble. That blend of art and strategy gave us the edge. We didn't just set traps. We built believable stories. Every swipe of color, every carved detail, every echo of engine noise added depth to the illusion. The real power? It came when I saw Allied troops advancing under cover of the smoke and noise we created. They reached their objectives more safely, because we distracted the enemy first. Looking back, I'm proud that the Ghost Army turned artists into soldiers, and soldiers into creators. We proved that art can change the outcome of a battle. And in the end, it wasn't just firepower that mattered. It was the vision to use art as strategy. I never thought of war as a canvas until I joined the Ghost Army. Our artists traded brushes for pumps. They swapped easels for air compressors, and yet their work saved lives. Painters who once chased gallery openings now painted giant rubber tanks at dawn. They mixed olive drab and sand like masters working in oils. The patterns they sprayed fooled the sharpest aerial cameras. They turned flat sheets into convincing war machines. Sculptors shaped vents and hatches from rubber putty. They studied every bolt, every weld of a Sherman tank. Their replicas looked so real, even engineers doing final checks paused in awe. Sound experts? They became field composers. They recorded engine groans, track clanks, like musical themes. Back at camp, they edited and mixed tapes, building the roar of a phantom division so vivid. German scouts believed every note. Radio operators wrote scripts like playwrights. Fake orders, supply calls, distress signals, even whispers of civilian spies. Their messages carried the voice of real units and kept German intelligence chasing ghosts. Watching these artists work side by side with engineers taught me something. Creativity wasn't just a perk, it was a weapon. A clever idea could do what guns could not. I remember watching a painter airbrush muddy streaks onto a tank's side. He stepped back, wiped sweat from his brow, and smiled. "It's our best wrecked tank yet," he said. I laughed, but he meant it. He knew those streaks might draw enemy fire away from real crews. In another corner, a sound tech hummed while adjusting his speakers. He said the tune helped him imagine real engines. Then he cranked up the volume, and we all felt the ground tremble. That blend of art and strategy gave us the edge. We didn't just set traps. We built believable stories. Every swipe of color, every carved detail, every echo of engine noise added depth to the illusion. The real power, it came when I saw Allied troops advancing under cover of the smoke and noise we created. They reached their objectives more safely, because we distracted the enemy first. Looking back, I'm proud that the Ghost Army turned artists into soldiers, and soldiers into creators. We proved that art can change the outcome of a battle. And in the end, it wasn't just firepower that mattered. It was the vision to use art as strategy. After all these years, I still marvel at what the Ghost Army taught me. First, war is as much about the mind as the battlefield. A clever trick can save more lives than a barrage of shells. Second, creativity knows no bounds. Our artists, our engineers, our sound techs, they proved that fresh ideas can change history. They turned rubber and tape into real weapons. Third, teamwork was everything. We trusted one another to keep the act alive, because one misstep, just one, could blow our cover and cost lives. But together, we held the illusion. And finally, I learned that pride doesn't always need a parade. We did our work in silence, but it mattered. We didn't chase fame. We watched each other's backs in tough times. Looking back, I see lessons for life too. Believe in your ideas, lean on your team, and always remember, perception shapes reality. Whether you're fighting a war or solving a problem at home, the same truths apply. I'm Billy Harris, planner turned illusionist. And the Ghost Army? They showed me something I'll never forget. That in the face of fear, fire, and chaos, imagination is the greatest weapon of all.